Happy employees are more productive and they stay longer. So that's what we have to learn to play up. And that's really what my role is as the chief storyteller.
Teaching and leading are rewarding but complex.
And whether you're in a classroom or a campus, new challenges are always emerging.
I'm Amy Vujaklija,
I'm Joi Patterson,
and this is Teaching and Leading.
where we explore teaching, leadership, equity, and the systems that shape education.
And how educators can grow, explore, and have a meaningful impact.
As teachers
and leaders. So let's get into it. Hello, Dr. Joi.
hello, Dr. Amy. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about our next episode talking about climate and culture.
Yes, and today what are we going to talk about? Perception versus reality. That's the big deal.
Yes, it is. Because we want to know how two employees working in the same department can experience the workplace so differently. In this episode, we are exploring how perception shapes organizational climate. And we are joined today by the Director of Communications and Public Information Officer, Zion Banks. She refers to herself as Chief Storyteller. Now, together, we are going to discuss negativity bias and emotional contagion and those workplace narratives, cognitive shortcuts, and how all of this influences the organizational communication. And I think you can agree with me, Joy, that understanding these dynamics can help leaders interpret the survey results. We've been talking about surveys, the climate and culture survey, and the satisfaction surveys, but perception really
Yeah,
shapes how those get interpreted.
yeah,
And we really need to respond in ways that build trust.
yeah. And we always use that term that perceptions are real, and then you have to say, but are they really? So one of the things that I've learned from leading these climate surveys is that the survey itself is only the beginning. Those numbers that we get from that survey, which I call the preliminary results, just tells us what people are experiencing, but it doesn't tell us the why, right? So that's why I, in particular, really love the forum so much because they talk about the why. So the surveys, we look at it, identifies the patterns, who's saying what groups, are feeling certain ways. But the forum, for me, it really provides context. They allow me to hear the stories behind the scores. And oftentimes they don't even want to talk about the scores. They just want to talk about their feelings. For example, if communication is always a big one. If communication scores are lower than expected, the survey tells us there's a concern, right? Because of the score you may receive. But when you sit down in a room with faculty and staff and students, and we just simply listen, we begin to understand what's really driving those responses. Maybe communication is actually absent, right? Or maybe it's inconsistent, or maybe it's timely for one group and not another. We were just talking about in our cabinet meeting that when we talk about some information, that sometimes those leaders are on their phones and they're giving it out, in real time. Others are waiting 2 weeks before they have a meeting and then they're telling their folks. So some of it is this timely. And then when you get into time, information changes. But so maybe leaders believe that, I'm communicating effectively because I got the message out, right? While employees feel like they're not receiving the information that they need to know to do their jobs. So, what they need and what we're giving could be two different things. So, those conversations, with really talking about the forms, what's behind the numbers, they really help us move beyond the assumptions. So, one thing that's always stood out to me, this is most employees do not participate in the survey because they're trying to criticize the institution. And sometimes they avoid the survey because they don't want to do it just to criticize. Most of them do it because they genuinely want their organization to succeed, right? So people don't wake up in the morning, like you didn't wake up this morning, Amy, and say, "Oh, I want to talk about something bad about my workplace today." But you may be thinking, "I want to work somewhere, someplace that listens to me, that values my contribution, and a place where I can continue to improve." So we have those conversations all the time. So people have invested years. You've invested years. Zion's invested years at our organization. We got relationships, we have purpose, we have pride, and we want to stay. And some of us want to stay to retirement. And so we want to be a part of what can make it better. So some of you might be saying, "Hey, this sounds like my marriage." It's exactly like a marriage, right? When you have disagreements and you're arguing because you're not trying to criticize your spouse, you're arguing because you want something to improve, which could be seeing things your way, but not necessarily. But you want things to improve, right? And you want things to be better because you want to stay, right? And so that's how I look at it, as the feedback is just really such a gift. It's not a criticism, and it's evidence that people still really care, and they care enough to get engaged.
Well, okay, let me ask this though. And Zion can maybe bounce in here too, to think about this perception. When people are talking, at the water cooler, in the hallway, or maybe there's an event, we vent. We vent to each other. We stop by each other's doors and oh, did you hear what just happened? Or this policy got changed, or oh, now we have a whatever dress code. Now, that's not what you saw in the climate survey. The overwhelming response actually improved from a previous survey. And so when people analyze the results of a survey, but they're also thinking about, well, but I heard this in the hallway. How come these two things aren't meshing? What makes that conflict, so much?
So I'm just thinking about like a very real scenario. Like if I get the climate survey on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, I'm going to give you my perception of what's going on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Now, if I get an email Tuesday at 6 indicating there's a new dress code or there's a new remote work policy, my perception or my views may shift. So if I took that same survey the next day, my answers might be a little bit different. I mean, I think those surveys are very valuable. I worked at a place where every year they won 100. I worked at a company where they were voted like one of the best places to work, like every year for 20 years. Those surveys are very, very valuable. But I also think that they reflect a point in time. So when I'm taking this survey on Tuesday at 2 or Wednesday at 10, this is how I feel at this particular time. Now, everybody's not as narrow as that, but I think most people are.
I wish you were in the first two episodes, especially when we talked about morale, because you
Yes.
actually just gave the definition to morale, and
Hmm.
morale being how you're feeling at any given point in time. So if we wanted to
Exactly.
measure morale, we could actually measure it every day if we wanted to, and it would be different every day. You got this dress code policy, you got layoffs, you got this, and everybody got a raise. Woo, so morale would be different every day, which is the difference between morale and climate. And so
Mm.
climate, when you start think about it from the outsider that's asking you a question. Tell me what it's like at Governor State? Tell me as an employee or that employee that you're interviewing, and you start talking about your benefits and how people treat each other and the diversity and all of that. That's your climate coming out. And
Okay. Okay.
feels very different than the morale that you just experienced because of the email you got. So imagine that 80% of the employees reported having positive experience, which is really encouraging. But if the only 20% had a negative experience, it doesn't mean that one experience is real and one is not, right? Uh,
Exactly.
and you feel better. Like I know I feel better. I feel better simply because the majority had a good experience. But on the other hand, we feel discouraged because it feels like no matter what you do and the difficult, comments and the things that you hear, it just kind of drains you, you know?
Well, you know what they say. You're not doing a good job if everyone's always
If
happy or every
everyone's always pleased, right?
yeah, you're not doing your job well. So we know that there are going to be some people who, no matter what you do, are upset. But if I got an 80% approval rating, I'd be over the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I would be over the moon. I would take that to mean that I'm doing what's right and what's good for my employee base for the productivity 80% of the time. That's a win.
But this also leads to another question I have because like you said, with timing, that morale can take a hit, depending on when you're being asked certain questions. The climate survey probably teases out more general responses than one that's time bound. But what is your thought on how negative experience seem sometimes to outweigh the positive? What do you think how gossip can influence climate? What are your thoughts on that, especially in your role as the storyteller?
Well, there's science behind how bad news travels, how gossip travels. Like it lights up areas of our brain. It makes more of an impact. I'm a former news person. Our standing motto, and it's horrible, but it was true, was if it bleeds, it leads. People are impacted and moved by bad news, much more so than good news. And so I do think that if bad news is kind of floating around the area, floating around the climate, it does impact our morale, our behavior, and how we respond on those climate surveys, as opposed to good news, which doesn't travel so fast, doesn't make as much of an impact, but it's very important. And I think that as leaders, we have to really play up what the good news is. We have to really play up the good news and make it make an impact because the good news is what impacts morale, and morale is what impacts productivity. And those are those long-standing relationships that we're talking about, the productivity. Happy employees are more productive and they stay longer. So
Yep.
that's what we have to learn to play up. And that's really what my role is as the chief storyteller.
Very good. I'm so glad you said that because we do have to remember that as leaders, because that's not the first reaction with leaders. When they hear something negative, it's always on the defense of
Right,
that's not what
right,
we intended. They don't understand everything that's happening. That's
right,
only one
right.
department. We go down the list. And those reactions are understandable because as leaders, you're deeply invested in the institution. You're putting in long hours, you're making difficult decisions, financial decisions, all of these things. And it seems like they just don't understand. uh, but employees, they experience it very differently. Their day to
Absolutely.
day is their reality.
Hmm.
Uh,
And we're all human, right?
right,
So
right.
if the team brings me something that can be perceived as bad news, I really try to step outside of myself and say, okay, this is how they feel. Their feelings are
Mhm.
valid. Let's just kind of suss it out. And I always try to leave the meetings, the situations in a better place
Yep. And it
rather
doesn't
than
mean that I'm right and you're wrong. It just means that we're simply looking through different windows, right? So there's no right.
perceptions.
Yep, perception.
Perceptions.
Yep, and our realities are different. One of the things I find fascinating about like storytelling, is storytelling, as you know, is just from that person's perspective. You naturally empathize with the character that's telling the story, right, Amy? Amy's a storyteller too, and you start to understand their motivation, their struggles, and the decisions that they make. So your team, whoever is telling the story,
Right,
and then when you hear the same story from someone else's perspective, then we realize that there's another truth that's unfolding at the same time. And both things can be right. Yes.
correct.
Mm-hmm. And
It's
so
like your
the same
perception,
thing
my
here.
perception, and then the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Right.
I think as leaders, individuals need to remember, leaders need to remember that transparency is important. Knowing the context, why decisions are made, if it's going to pose a negative impact on someone, why a decision is made is important to be transparent. But also the kudos, the leading with the positive and emphasizing the positive, because so often, if we are perpetuating that negative story or we're not countering or adding to the negativity or balancing it with something positive, the negativity will take over.
Mhm.
Often, even whenever it doesn't have a place, it doesn't really have a good foundation or anything that it's kind of built on gossip or just whatever that water cooler traffic is saying. So those kudos are important. Balancing that negativity with positivity. And I think also that messaging and really pushing the positive story, not just as a balance to negativity, but find the good stories
Mm-hmm.
and elevate them. I think that is going to be key to kind of really helping with this perception. The other thing I want to say though is when that negativity comes to your door is
Mm-hmm.
countering it with where did you hear that information? What is the truth underneath that information? And then countering with, but here's the context.
Yeah, I think I told you last time I learned to embrace gossip and I didn't before because it gives you that opportunity, right? Of sharing the truth or sharing some light, and in the leadership position, is not about proving whose perception is right, because we just talked about that. Uh, it's about understanding why different perceptions exist. So, why do people feel this way? And then creating an environment where people can move forward in a shared reality. So, we still have to understand the why of the perception.
I
Let
agree
me,
with you, Dr. Joy. I'm sorry, Dr. Amy. I think that context is everything. We keep like bringing up the remote work policy. What's the context behind that? Why was that decision made? Are other schools coming back, other staffs coming back to work more day? Like, what is it? Did we just kind of make it up out of a vacuum? Is there a monetary motivation behind it? And I think that once you give people the context, then they can make a more informed decision. If you just say, hey, this is a new policy, then there's a knee jerk response. And so, even in HR training, we talk about high context and low context. And so, that context can give you all the clues that you need, the context clues that we grew up with to know how to process this or how to feel about this. Is this really a good thing for productivity, for employee morale, for community building, or is this a punishment? Let us know. And so I love that about transparency that these are the factors leading to this decision. This is what happens if we don't make this decision. This is what happens as we move forward. Full context. I love it.
I want to ask both of you too, when we're confronted with that negativity or with that gossip, what can we do? What are some strategies or ways to turn it into a more constructive dialogue? What kind of questions should we be asking the person who's talking the tale, spreading negativity, or just venting? And that's fine. We want people to be comfortable to share their experiences and how they are affected by the workplace happenings. But what are some ways to turn it into a constructive dialogue?
Yeah, that's
Well, for me, gossip is information. I'm sorry.
go
Gossip
right
is
ahead.
information. So, like Dr. Joy said, where did you get that information? What was the context? What do you think this means? Does that make sense in the context of everything else that's going on? I mean, we talk it through. What happens if this is not true? How many people have you shared this with? Are we damaging somebody's reputation? Are we boosting their reputation? So just kind of talking it through, answering all the questions. Why is this important to you? Why are you bringing me this information?
Right. And I also end it with what their responsibility is because a lot of times they're talking, oh, morale is down or this, that. And I'll end it with, well, what are you doing
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
shape someone's morale, to lift somebody up? What are you doing? And it causes them to pause. And like you, I do believe now that I embrace it, that gossip is information and it is an opportunity for you to set
Mm-hmm.
the record straight.
Yeah, it's information. It's some people think that it's a great thing in the workplace because it builds community and sharing and a sense of belonging. I'm just saying.
All right. Put that on my list of things of how to increase belonging.
15-second gossip session. Go.
From
I've loved this conversation. I think this perception and reality, we all struggle with it, but really being able to look at the context and understand where people are coming from is so important. I think there's a lot we can do. And I think what we're saying here today, leaders, you got to take that step forward and do something to make sure that climate and culture is elevated, and it's your responsibility. It's all of our responsibility to increase the positivity and to really celebrate each other.
Well, I think that one way we can kind of shift morale, shift negative perceptions, really is to build trust, like Dr. Joy said. Really is to kind of encourage people to not to fill out a survey, but to come and talk and to vent and to let their perceptions be heard so that at least they feel like when decisions are made, they're not being made in a vacuum, that their input was there and that their input was heard. I mean, for me, it comes back to building a sense of trust. Do the
yeah,
employees trust leadership? Do
right.
employees trust whoever is making the decisions? Do they feel like they've been seen and heard in the decision making process?
Absolutely. I agree.
That's something that I get with my team a lot. Where did this come from?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's good.
Well,
And
what about our schedules?
that's
Sorry, let's rethink this.
good.
I think they appreciate it. I mean, that I'm open and that I'm willing to listen. Sometimes the decision stands, sometimes I change it, but I think they feel, my prayer is that they feel seen and heard.
Hmm. And that's important. So trust is important. So I think that that's a good place for us to land this episode.
Okay. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to Teaching and Leading with Dr. Amy and Dr. Joy.
This podcast is supported by Governor State University.
Show notes and resources for this episode are available at govst.edu/teaching and leading podcast.
Until next time,
Keep growing
as teachers
and leaders.